All right, here we go. Theoretically, and I'm congested, of course, just in time. Anybody watching the recording afterwards, you can probably skip the first 5 or 10 minutes. It'll depend on what your definition of officially starting is. I need to mute myself, edit video, and then we go out here, live, turn the monetization on, preferably. I'd like to earn $3 whole from this. Live, live chat. Dismiss that. That should be everything. Hello, and Josh theoretically should show up within a minute. Ah, get these bimbos off the screen. What do we need? Google Earth, as always, unfortunately. And it would probably, we'll need this, even though the new numbers aren't actually like here for the population and GDP stuff. Those won't actually be posted until I think what was it we learned in 2023? They usually post that stuff in not until April and May. Unfortunately, it really doesn't take that long to put numbers into an Excel spreadsheet. Like tradingeconomics.com, if you're listening, you're welcome to hire me. It's not that much work to put numbers into an Excel sheet. It really isn't. I do that, in my free time. Supposedly as I'm generous enough to myself to call it work. That's how I make all the graphs and stuff, actually, or obviously that you guys get to see. So, just for example, for anybody who is relatively new-ish, in the descriptions of the more recent videos, there's a bunch of links to different Google Docs and stuff, where I have all kinds of data compilations and graphs and things that I make for you guys. Because for one, a lot of the graphs, especially like for example, the pie charts of each country's electricity generation breakdown by source, a lot of these only update like every 5 or 6 years from official sources. The graphs, at least, the data gets published, but if you look up graphs of something like this for non-major countries like the US or China, if you look it up for other countries like say Iran, usually you'll find the latest like graph was published in 2017. So I do stuff like this now, but I actually update these every single year when new data comes out. And that's not the only thing. There's all kinds of other stuff. There's actually an eighth one now that I made, and a ninth one that I will make available once there's like enough in it to warrant making it available. But I'm gonna drink some water and check the timer. Okay, so 6 minutes until I will officially start and make sure I actually have my note page this time. I do. Okay, we've got almost everything on here. So we're gonna do all the war update stuff. Uh, talk about Ecuador and some other places that have had interesting things happen. Stuff going on in Libya, and we've also had some population and GDP economy number updates, and also a lot of birth rate or fertility rate, whichever term you prefer for it. We have had a lot of updates about that. And turns out uh, the East Asian nations are not going to entirely end up being unique in their regard of like going towards or even below one. It looks like now other places are even starting to chase after that trend as well. So it looks like they're not going to be a global outlier. But let me drink some water real quick. Ooh, 9 already. That's decently fast. Where's Josh, though? And of course, YouTube claims my bitrate is 0. Let me check. It is not 0. Oh, never mind. Now it says I have an excellent connection. Do you think Somalia and Ethiopia will have war over Somaliland? I mean, that depends because Ethiopia made an actual agreement with the separated government of Somaliland. It didn't like between Ethiopia and Somaliland as the separate entity. They made an agreement over the port in Berbera, not just a like it wasn't just Ethiopia also telling Somaliland itself that they're going to use the Berbera ports, and there's nothing you can do about it. Somaliland actually like signed that agreement and everything with them, but Somaliland is a still claimed as part of Somalia, and Somalia says no. And also, there's issues in Somaliland itself because not all of Somaliland is like in agreement with the whole Somaliland separate thing anymore. I'm pretty sure it's these 2 or 3 regions over here, which, go figure, they're the ones that are closest to Somalia itself, uh, kind of aren't like all on board with this whole arrangement. So now it's more like I believe the western chunk of it. Whether Somalia like would like do anything about that though, probably not exactly because they're still fighting the militancy and Al Shabaab and everything else down in regular Somalia. They have effectively crushed them at this point. Like militant control over or the amount of territory in Somalia controlled by militant groups has collapsed by over 90% since April of last year. But that is still an ongoing thing, and they are still utilizing a lot of what government resources they have to reestablish like connections and everything with different towns and small cities that were cut off from the world at large because they were under militant control for like the last decade or so. So they are a bit more focused on that, but there is also then the possibility that a giant portion of just the general population itself might just take up AK-47s and like march their way up there and uh, and participate. But we'll have to see. In which case, it would legitimately be a issue for Ethiopia because the Ethiopian military fighting against that would not be like the IDF fighting against Hamas and Hamas allies, 1,000 miles up north there, because the Ethiopian military is not really a military. It's it's a bunch of dudes with some assault rifles and jeeps, and also they have a couple dozen like ancient uh, tanks from the 50s, if you're being generous. In reality, they were the like final tank models that were designed at the end of World War II. And they have a few functional fighter jets, most of which are the ancient MiG, like MiG 19 or 21. Yeah, ancient. They have these ancient things, but they those are useful for them for dropping, unguided or dumb bombs on generic just rebel infantry in the separatist regions that they've been trying to genocide via starvation for the last 3 years. But that's all they really have. Other than that, it effectively is just infantry versus infantry. In which case, that then kind of turns in Somalia's direction, actually, and it would be even more so if one of the nations, uh, of which there are many who've declared their support for Somalia, one of which is the U.S., who currently has a large force massed around this particular area for other reasons. If one of those kind of put in a unspoken agreement to like shoot down Ethiopian aircraft if they happened to cross over into like Somali territory, then effectively that would nullify the whole threat of Ethiopia's single digit count of ancient MiG 19s. But also, Ethiopia kind of needs those to keep bombing their own separatist rebels and also massacring civilians in those separatist regions, anyways. So Ethiopia would kind of have a question of resource redirecting and how they really want to play that. But at the current moment, it doesn't look really seem like anyone's actually like doing anything. But we'll see how that all goes. All right, I'm gonna drink some more water and then start officially. Since that question took me off by like 5 minutes. Actually, I need to get some tissues and hand sanitizer too, so give me a minute. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, on paper, they have 200 T-72 tanks. However, those mysteriously don't seem to actually ever make it anywhere. Just like how, uh, just like how, on paper, on paper, they actually have supposedly around like 30 aircraft, but in reality, we know it's more like about eight. And how Iran, supposedly has about 300 combat aircraft, F-14s, ancient F-4s, and some semi-modern, I think, MiG-29s. However, in reality, especially because of maintenance cannibalism, that number is a lot closer to like 120. And also, T-72s are complete and absolute crap. Like that's been really easily proven. And also, even if they're, crappy and their maintenance is cheaper, that the maintenance still requires money, which no matter how fast Ethiopia is rising, the percentages in this case don't matter. The actual physical amount of money does. And Ethiopia doesn't have it. Like this is also the same thing with how Venezuela's supposedly large military apparatus is in reality non-existent. because their military budget in Venezuela's case, at least, Venezuela military, yeah, theirs is like 800 million or something like that. It's sub billion, 741 million. Yeah, what's Ethiopia? Is at a cursory glance? There's isn't one of the ones that I just know off the top of my head. I know the largest, like the largest military forces on Earth. I know their general numbers. Oh, wow, that is hilarious, actually. Ethiopia actually has a higher budget than Venezuela. That is just sad. Well, what's their government revenue? I'm actually interested now because their economy is about 100 billion. So 5 billion is about 5% of their GDP. What's their government? Obviously, that's where that would be. Government. They do not report their government revenue. Hmm. Interesting. Government budget. Oh, that's the government budget deficit. Okay. Okay, we can't backtrack that to find their actual like percent of GDP that gets taken into their government. Uh, uh, just by deficit because we kind of need the amount. Actually, wait, no, government. Oh, what is their military expenditure? Okay, Wikipedia claims 5 billion, which is seems a bit no. Over here, this is from the Strategic Institute of whatever that is, ERJ. Uh, yeah, I'm willing to buy 1 billion, which would still be more than Venezuela, which is still kind of sad on Venezuela's part. But yeah, 1 billion is a bit more viable because again, their total economy is only about 100 billion, and economy, GDP, and government revenue are not the same. No government gets 100% of the economic output of its particular country. Usually, the ratio is uh, what is it? I think U.S. like U.S. actual government revenue intake is something like four, just somewhere between 4 and 5 trillion, versus the spending of like closer to 6 trillion. So we'll say 4.5, and that's out of roughly 26. So blah blah blah. So that's if you round up to 27, that's about a sixth of GDP as government revenue. So and that's you'll get similar numbers for most countries. So that would mean Ethiopia probably has a government revenue of maybe 15 billion, assuming the entire 100 billion is like transactional taxable economy and not informal economy. In which case that would give a total government budget of like the 15 billion, which then like yeah, 1 billion out of 15 billion would be a believable military expenditure versus supposedly 5 billion out of 15 billion would be a bit pushy, even for even for more like hyper militaristic countries, which Ethiopia isn't. Like the because that would be 30% of government expenditure on military, and the highest ones, at least I'm aware of, are I think Saudi Arabia and Oman, and they're like 8%. Although North Korea is probably higher because they're hyper militaristic and they're effectively a death cult, but they we don't actually like know their real numbers because they don't publish them, obviously, for obvious reasons. Now, since we are here, I'll go ahead and just start with stuff here. Since we are here, we got Somalia's numbers, and they are going in line with my expectations that instead of just following a linear trend, which would take them up towards about 14 or 15 billion in total GDP economic value by 2032 over the next 8 years or so, because of the reintegration of a lot of people and towns from the mass liberation from the militants over the last year or so, and from the eventual influx over the coming years of actual like business and stuff. The first initial influx of everything because of the effects the stability will have. And I stopped at 2032 for one because that was the arbitrary year I chose for that most recent stream we did about like future trends and production numbers and stuff. But also because that would be the around the likely time that Somalia's first oil production will probably end up starting. So, once you go past that point, you would then have oil revenue skewing the GDP numbers off of like the background economy. So, I don't want to venture like past that because then I'd have to factor in like extra variables and do extra math, which I will eventually do because I always end up doing it anyways. But uh, I suspect by like 2032, they'll actually end up closer to like 20 billion in total economic size. And they are on the accelerated pathway as they were about just under 11 billion at the end of 2022. And it looked like they would probably go up to like 11 and a half, maybe 11.6. But turns out for 2023 or over the course of, and then by the end of, they actually went up a bit over 12 to between 12 and 12 and a half. So they are actually on an upward accelerated pathway. Oh, always get congested at the most convenient times. Did I have anything else regarding them? On the other side of the page here, let's see. No, not on the other side. Where was the stuff for them here, though? Oh, yeah, I forgot. So their their universities have now been like fully functional for a number of years, and are actually they're now actually having their first graduated classes of fully educated people in this particular university just graduated its first class of people, 46 in different marine field studies like marine biology, general marine sciences, marine infrastructure engineering, and stuff like that. So that in particular is actually like a really solid development and stability indicator about the like upcoming, not just economic, but just general upward societal rising and development acceleration on their part. Now that now that stuff like this is actually able to like really happen without, and universities and schools and everything there are able to have been like just functioning for multiple years now with no like government breakdowns, no no delaying of classes by a year because, the school got blown up by multiple suicide bombings. Stuff is actually like staying still and happening, which is good, obviously. And hopefully everyone would also think so. But as I've learned from the kind of comments I've seen of different groups of people towards and about each other, and completely unrelated groups of people about and towards either one of those particular groups of people, mostly on Twitter, because that's where you see that kind of stuff most of all, but even in my own comment section, as I've learned, people, the majority of people actually don't really think that good things happening to other people are good and bad things happening to other people are bad. It all depends on what select groups of people that those people have decided are worth the existence of, and versus those they decide shouldn't exist. Of which apparently the majority of the human population actually has some selections like that, which is really disturbing. As I've learned, I am quite alone in the list of like actual humans remaining, particularly who view other humans, as humans. Where's Josh? Josh, are you there yet? My fellow human, are you out there somewhere? All right, and actually, Ethiopia gives us a jumping point because Ethiopia is one of the places where the 737 Max, the death dive airplane, yeah, the death dive airplane. That's one of the places where the 737 Max uh, did its death dive a few years back, because the 737 Max initially had a autopilot system that was rather murderous and would just seize control of the aircraft and ram it into a nose down and just like crash into the ground. Did that in Ethiopia, did that over in Malaysia or Indonesia. And so it got taken out of service for a while, and it got put back in service until we found out that Boeing didn't really make the fuselage all that great, and chunks of it, apparently just blow out at random as it's flying around. So this is continuing to put nails in the coffin of Boeing, as that's another on a list of things that I've been saying for a while, is that Boeing is dead. Boeing sucks. Airbus is superior, completely and absolutely at this point. French aviation supremacy, without discounting the others. Yes, I know. I know Deutschland, you're in there too, and Spania. I think you guys do stuff along with it, and there's a little bit of Netherlands and Denmark in there too, I think. But hey, the factory is in Toulouse, so sorry guys, but I'm predominantly giving it to France. Plus Deutschland, you've been pissing me off for a while and making really dumb decisions about stuff, so you're losing credit for what part you do play in some good things. But yeah, Airbus is claiming its supremacy, especially as the A350, one of my favorite aircrafts, their brand new one that they put out in 2013, just had its first like legitimate actual accident in Japan, and it wasn't even it wasn't even their fault. It had nothing to do with the A350 itself. There was no fault of the plane. It was another aircraft that ended up crashing into it because that other aircraft, a small propeller aircraft, disobeyed the directions it got from the air traffic control tower and took off right into the path of the A350. And the A350 uh, survived the impacts like perfectly fine. It crashed. No one was like really injured, and it took longer than it was, quote unquote, supposed to. Not that they intend, not that they wanted to catch fire like really fast within a specific time frame, but it took longer than it was supposed to, than it was expected to like fully come up in flames. So the even just like the material composition design in the A350 is actually better than it was anticipated to be. So we are continuing to see this just epic ownage of Airbus over Boeing. And now, over the last week or two since that accident, airlines have been starting to reconsider their Boeing orders. Like I know a lot of the Indian airlines in India are starting to switch their stuff over to Airbus orders instead. The ones that are sticking with Boeing are the ones that effectively don't care, like the Emirates Airlines and Qatar Airways, because they don't. I mean, it's not like they care about like safety or anything. Uh, just like how they don't actually care about Islam. They're not the at least the ruling families and governments of the Persian Gulf nations, the rich ones, don't actually care about Islam. They just care about money. They worship money. Hopefully, as you could probably already tell yourself by the kinds of like obscene vanity projects that they spend hundreds of billions of dollars on. But yeah, Boeing is crashing itself both literally and metaphorically. And I mean, I've seen this coming for a while. Like started seeing this even when I was young, before I was doing anything like this, before I was actually doing not even just streaming or YouTube videos, but just into stuff like I am now. Even just way back when, like in the early 2010s, late 2000s, I could kind of see this coming because they were making it pretty obvious, especially with the early 787s, because they were always getting delayed by their batteries for their like onboard backup power stuff. Even though they weren't running, obviously, because they had the regular power on, their batteries, especially in the early 787s that they gave to the different Japanese airlines, the batteries were always just randomly catching fire and, causing obviously those flight cancellations, which caused backlogs and stuff. So they were making it pretty obvious a while ago. But then the 737 MAX stuff kind of started sealing the deal. And now this has caused a lot of constant reworks, double checks, and delays. Where's the it's probably under development. Yeah, the delays. Yeah, blah blah blah. Yeah, they after the 737 Max stuff uh, that caused them to have to go into a bunch of stuff, double checking on the 777X, which they initially thought was going to come out in like 2021 or something, but they've kept pushing it back. They pushed it back to 2023, and now have pushed it all the way back to 2025. And this was in April 2022, before the most recent 737 Max accident. So now, because of the scrutiny that's going to come down, the scrutiny hammer that's going to come down on them about their fuselage material composition and engineering, that's probably the 777X manufacturing and delivery is probably going to get pushed back to like 2026 or 2027 now. So Boeing continues to self terminate. And while we're still in Africa, we'll cover some other Africa stuff real quick. And then we will jump over into one of the big ones, one of the two primary conflicts at the moment. So Algeria continues with my Algeria rising trend as another one, this one right here, And if obviously if you want to look up or follow any of these different like news accounts and stuff, you can if you want to use X, that is, aka Twitter, because X is really stupid, and Elon Musk hasn't moved past the 80s and 90s, back when everyone was being cringe and everything related to the future had an X at the end of it. As you can tell by the fact that so many of his companies he keeps putting X on them. But Algeria project though uh, is a bit spammy in the regard to where like a lot of their tweets are just about this new soccer stadium that's being built, which gets really old, and I really don't care. I care about actual stuff, like this steel mill that is being expanded uh, via investment from Qatar. So Algeria currently produces actually around 2 to sometimes as much as 2.5 and maybe close to 3 million tons of steel a year, depending. It would depend on mostly their domestic market, as they didn't get a lot of export orders until the recent few years, as with everyone seeing what's upcoming with China and Taiwan, and with what started with Russia and Ukraine, which took some steel production offline on both ends. The people have started turning to other markets for steel, and one of those places was Algeria. Granted, they had limited capacity, but that will soon no longer be the case, as they have two new steel mills being built that will boost them in the either I think around like 2026 or 2027. Those will boost them up to about 5 million tons of steel per year, million tons of steel per year capacity. And this new one, that is, or it's not a new mill, it's an expansion onto an existing mill, their largest one, will add another 2 million. So that will bring them up to around 7+ million tons of steel manufacturing per year capacity. But this one just started in terms of the expansion construction, so that one will probably be 2027, 2028, unless it finishes faster than expected. And also, they already have one olive oil plant under construction. They just started another one. One was in the west, the one was in the east. I forget which one is which, but the point is they are beginning to move upwards into into exporting actual like at least second level finished products instead of just raw stuff. Like instead of just exporting oil, they are now also moving into like exporting some fuel products to a certain degree, as their domestic oil consumption levels are around 450,000 barrels per day at the moment. However, they're now up to refining about 600 plus thousand barrels per day of oil products, which they then export primarily to Tunisia and some over to Malta. But they do plan on increasing that, though. Natural gas, obviously, because it's is already the finished product, because it's going to be used for either power generation or heating. It's just going to be burned up in Europe. So natural gas, obviously, they're going to keep just exporting as natural gas because that's what it's going to be used as. But previously, similar to their neighbor Tunisia and Morocco, they have been exporting olives a lot up to Europe, which then a lot of time get turned into olive oil for cooking and stuff. However, now once those two olive oil plants are complete, Algeria itself is actually going to turn the olives into olive oil, which is obviously a second level finished product and earns more money than just the raw olives themselves. And then we'll sell the olive oil to Europe, and also with the steel, because Algeria does have a lot of iron ore, and near Tindouf, they're actually going to be expanding their iron ore mining. You can literally see like the places where the iron ore is thick, where there's a lot of red or darker red in the sand. But instead of, just exporting iron ore like, say, Mauritania does, Algeria is going the direction of actually making the iron ore into steel themselves and then exporting the steel. So Algeria is making their way upwards. And on the subject of their neighbor Tunisia, or Tunisia, got some more rain. Thankfully, praise God. They were heading down towards only 20% full across their entire national water supply again, but they got some more rain, which took them up to about 33% full. So they've stalled things off for a couple months once more. We'll obviously then now see how things go after this. Libya, our final note from Africa, probably they have had a oil production shutdown of over 300,000 barrels per day because the citizenry of Libya is currently in a state of unrest with mass protests against different forms of government corruption. And those protests have shut down one of the major oil fields because, obviously that cuts off money which the government is spending on itself. So, or the members of the government are spending on themselves, rather. So Libya has dropped from 1.24 down to somewhere under 900,000 barrels per day, closer to 900 than to 850, I think, at least as of the moment. And that is our array of stuff for Africa, at least. Oh, no, wait. No, we're not done. Not just yet. As offshore of Namibia, down here in the same area, this, sort of divot fan on the slope here, we had another discovery. That makes four so far, all of which have been in this general area here. So that's four discoveries so far. One more was just made a few days ago, and size of the discovery has not been determined yet, but it should probably be at least, on the minimum range of similarity to the others, which, given the others, the total, the expectancy from them, once they would all be brought online within a few years of each other in across the later 2020s through early 2030s, was going to be a peak of 800,000. The addition of this one, however much it comes out to be, should at least probably mean that a end peak expected from the totality of just the four of those will probably be up, over 900,000, and maybe, but probably below, or maybe close to, but probably below 1 million barrels per day, which would be reached in the probably later part of the early 2030s or the early part of the mid 2030s. That's a fourth one stacked for Namibia now, all of which have been in just this area right down here. As because of Namibia's particular setup, we had initially thought it was going to be kind of like Angola in terms of amount and developability and, the like end production totals that would come out of that. But it's actually turning out it's starting to look like Namibia is actually going to be more like southern Brazil, which means instead of getting up through one and peaking around two, but then falling from that like Angola, Namibia, if they go all out, you know, could probably well go up over 3 million and peak somewhere up over there. All right, so that's it for everything we have for Africa this time, at least until we go into the various GDP updates and birth rate updates later. But that is a full world abroad topic. So let me check chat before we go into uh, conflict stuff and nothing from chat that I have to speak on. Okay, so starting with the most controversial, uh, we have the continuing conflict in Gaza with the numbers no longer as lopsided for the IDF as they began at. So, for those who are unaware, of which there are a few of you left, October 7th, Hamas managed to actually like break through into Israel with about 4,000 combatants, and uh, they did some massacres. They got into combat with the IDF, and out there in open, non-urbanly condensed combat, the ratio was pretty lopsided against them. Uh, in terms of IDF versus Hamas, it was about 5-1. As about 1,500 Hamas members were killed in those engagements versus only around 300 IDF members. Uh, and Israel initially claimed that 1,400 civilians were killed. However, they have constantly revised down that number, constantly admitting to less and less. Now, their official stated number is that it was actually about 700. And in the aftermath of that, the IDF began effectively just indiscriminately carpet bombing Gaza, which has now resulted in around 35,000 dead civilians, about 30,000 or about 28,000 or so officially dead, with 8 or 9,000 listed as missing and or missing under rubble, which just means they're dead. Uh, but you're not going to find the body. And in and the IDF eventually invaded Gaza, first in the northern portion, and said they weren't doing anything in the south. Knew that was a lie, and lo and behold, it was. So they're now also in the south around Khan Yunis. Where's Khan Yunis? Why isn't it showing up? Khan Yunis. Where is it? I thought it would be something that would show up. Where is it? Oh, wow. Thank you, Google Earth. It's the name of this entire city area, but it's not something you show until I zoom in this far. Wow, that is some real competency on your part. See, what is this? Come on. So, there is now conflict all throughout that area, and surface conflict in upper Gaza is effectively over. Now it is, for the last number of weeks, has literally been the IDF engaging with Hamas in the tunnel network, in which, to the surprise of no one, the casualty ratio has completely stopped being lopsided. Granted, the IDF has taken way less fatalities, but when you actually factor in for critical injuries, critical injury specifically referring to soldiers who have been injured to the point of either being handicapped or crippled, just in general definition, or who've been injured so severely to the point of uh, being rendered or labeled as never able to return to combat ever, whether or not they're crippled in the actual societal sense or not. The number of unable to ever be returned to a combat role injuries has exceeded 4,000, while IDF fatalities are only around 600 or so. But that's a total of around or just over 4,500 versus a vague likely number of 9 to 10,000 Hamas fatalities. Hamas injury numbers uncertain, but Hamas has also likely taken way more fatalities than injuries. But so probably a bit under 10,000 Hamas deaths. So that's now only in terms of just casualties in general. That's now, although the IDF again has suffered way more injuries than fatalities, just the casualties overall, that is now only like a 2-to-1 ratio, or barely above a 2-to-1 ratio, because now the IDF is kind of stuck realizing and enacting the stupidity of this whole thing, which is tunnel warfare. So it's now literally guys poking back and forth at each other around corners, taking a few shots, firing a few bursts, and then uh, on Hamas's end, just firing an RPG down the tunnel, which then severely injures like 5 dudes at once, and also the IDF finding out that the tunnels are full of traps because of course they are, and in their like retreat down the tunnels away from the IDF, Hamas has also like buried mines in the tunnel, which are then like blowing dudes up and collapsing the tunnels on top of people. So it's not exactly going all that well down there because of course it wasn't going to. And then there is also the northern front, which has actually lit up a lot more over the last couple weeks. Hezbollah in Lebanon has not taken anywhere near as many casualties as Hamas has. They've only had about 200 of their guys get killed out of about 100,000 or so. Some sources say they only have about 80,000. We're not, entirely sure. They don't publish a public roster or anything. But unlike Hamas, which only had unguided rockets and had about 30,000 of them, out of which they fired around 25,000 now. So they only have about 5,000 left. And, obviously that's kind of why you've seen a drastic reduction in the amount of their rocket launches over the last like month or month and a half. Hezbollah does have way more unguided rockets. They have close to 150,000, or did at the start. They fired something like 6 or 7,000 now, but they also have actual like military weaponry uh, on parts of Iran getting them stuff. At the start, they had likely around 2,000 ballistic missiles, which are the difference between cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. For anyone who needs to know, cruise missiles have smaller boom, a smaller explosion, but they are guided. You put in a set of coordinates, and depending on the generation and the sophistication of the cruise missiles, like the most modern U.S., Japanese, UK, French cruise missiles, you fire those, and they will fly towards a target. They will fly low to try to avoid, to try to fly under radar floors or the lowest level of radar coverage. They'll intentionally fly in zigzags. They will juke out AD systems, and they have computerization and actual miniature onboard IR or radar systems on them that will then try to identify a target once they get within range of a specific set of coordinates, and will try to target the target itself instead of just going to a set of coordinates. Whereas a ballistic missile is what predated the first generation of cruise missiles, effectively similar to the V2 rockets from Germany. You put in a set of coordinates, plug it into the gyroscope essentially, and you launch the rocket. It goes up and it falls where you told it to. No moving, no maneuvering to avoid interception, nothing. So uh, Hezbollah does have ballistic rockets, and ballistic rockets do tend to have a larger explosive on them, though, which is like their only real benefit is that they make a really big boom instead of only a small one. But small, it doesn't matter if you only have a small boom using a cruise missile. If your cruise missile is like a really good one, unlike Russian ones, and can actually hit what you want it to. And ironically, oh, fun fact, if you want to call it that, hilariously, since the Houthis have been using the Iranian ones, we've seen, although they've been intercepted, we've been able to judge based on like how on course they were. Uh, it's looking like the Iranian cruise missiles, at least the latest ones that Iran has given the Houthis, actually have a higher average accuracy than the Russian ones, which, isolated, supposed to be lower country having better, like more accurate targeting tech than the supposed secondary superpower is, kind of a really lopsided, sad bit of a joke, but it's turning out to be the case. But Hezbollah has launched a couple dozen of their ballistic missiles into Israel. A few made it through and didn't. They didn't get to strike anything major though. And Israel has now started like massively bombing and artillery striking southern Lebanon in preparation for their inevitable partial invasion of Lebanon. Although they've promised, oh, it's only going to be like the southern 10% because that's where Hamas is, even though that's not true. Hamas is all over the place. But, we saw the it's only going to be XYZ thing with Gaza before. And then in southern Israel, they've also been repeatedly struck by a few long range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that the Houthis in Yemen have launched, as they have actually more than Hezbollah does because of their sea access and non proximity to Israel. Iran has actually been able to get them a lot more things than they've been able to get to Hezbollah. Their ballistic missile count is similar, around like 2,000, and they have launched more than Hezbollah has. They've launched about 50 or so, some which were sent up towards southern Israel, a few hit, uh, and a few have been launched towards ships, which you can launch ballistic missiles at ships. You just have to like know the speed the ship is going at and like where it is, thus calculate the heading and where it would be when the ballistic missile actually hits. They haven't succeeded with those. Their calculations have consistently been off. They've managed to get pretty close. So, I mean, they're doing their math like decently, but not like entirely spot on because don't they don't have access to like the actual like full real-time satellite data that the global mercantile fleet itself like kind of keeps a bit like close to the chest. And so they have to rely on coastal radars, uh, a lot of which were just taken out a few days ago during those strikes that the US and the UK carried out. But even using those, they were able to actually calculate pretty close. And they got a few of them to land within like a couple hundred meters of some ships. But so they weren't able to actually succeed with actual hits. They were able to succeed on hits on various ships, though, with Shahid suicide drones that they got from Iran. Because again, like I said previously, Iran actually, despite people thinking that we're just automatically assuming since I'm in America and I'm going to like downplay everything in Iran's regard. Iran deserves credit for the Shahid drone. It's actually a really, really good drone. It's actually in its range is actually really impressive, and its targeting accuracy is equally impressive. Although it doesn't, what it does lack is like full modern like high power electronics on it to like discern priority like targeting features. So the only like real downside it has is that it only can identify just a target like in general as a big block object, and it will just hit whatever. which kind of, then is a bit of an issue because when you're dealing with something like a big giant container vessel, you're you're probably just going to like hit a random container and destroy some iPhones or something versus like actually intentionally targeting like the back of the ship to disable the engine or something like that. And that's been the case. Most of the Shahed drones that were not shot down by the coalition naval assembly, most of those did hit ships, basically just hit random portions of the ships and either uh, blew off some of like the safety railing or they hit a container. And I don't know what was in those specific containers, but as my joke is, they destroyed a couple thousand iPhones and thus pissed off a bunch of customers, probably up in Europe, who are now going to have to wait a couple extra weeks to get their order of the iPhone like 17,500X YB4. And then they do also have cruise missiles. However, they don't have as many of those because Iran, understandably, probably wants to keep most of those it makes for itself. They the Houthis, to our knowledge, did have about 360 or so at the start of all this, and they've launched about 40 of those. Those have been launched primarily at southern Israel. Some of those did get through and did hit targets that they were intending to. Not like the targets they probably would have preferred, but they did hit a few like portions of pavement and some random buildings on Israel's primary military base down on the southern tip there. However, now the US and UK carried out a massive series of airstrikes and cruise missile strikes in the Houthi area of Yemen a couple nights ago and have carried out a few lighter strikes each night since then, with the general estimate in terms of like weapon stock, in terms of the Shahed drones that they have on hand and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that they have on hand. About 25% were estimated to be taken out, judging by the amount of like warehouse damage and stuff, and the amount of scattered parts that could be seen on satellite imagery the next day, and obviously also like spy drone and spy aircraft imagery, and a decent portion of their coastal radar stations that are how they were like tracking ships and plotting like their trajectory to launch ballistic missiles to intercept them at a specific point. A decent portion of those were taken out. Of the 25 percent of general weaponry stock, I have no idea. Uh there's no actual specifics of like what that constituted in a portion out of each type, like out of Shahed drones, out of ballistic missiles, out of cruise missiles. I doubt they literally mean, an exact evenly spread 25% of each. So, in terms of like their total net remaining amounts, they likely, have now a substantially lesser amount than 1950, ballistic missiles remaining. So I would imagine that means probably like a few hundred of those were destroyed, probably at least a few dozen out of the remaining 320 cruise missiles. And we were uncertain actually of the total number of Shahed drones they have. I've not been able to find like an official count for that, but they're even with what they have remaining, their ability for the moment to launch like continued attacks, at least with missiles, has been drastically cut down because of the coastal radar destruction. They can still, however, uh, do attempted actual boat hijackings, which they did hijack one ship a number of weeks back by landing on it via helicopter. They tried another one up here in the Red Sea by fast attack boat, by driving up to it really fast in boats. However, a U.S. Vessel was in the area and responded in time and sunk three out of the four of those high-speed boats. And I believe they did try that again in the Gulf of Aden recently, but they backed out because a UK or French warship was nearby and they saw it coming. So they peeled out before an actual engagement could occur. So they still could keep doing those in the immediate future if they're able to like get to a ship that is not within the immediate vicinity of one of the coalition warships. And also, they probably have some spare radar components that they can bring back out to utilize those coastal radar positions again. Granted, they would know that that would be a really short window because they would be destroyed in strikes pretty quick after utilizing them again. But I mean, they're jihadists, so they probably will do it anyways because they probably don't care since their their ironically their public like speech in response to it was actually yes, we dream of this, kill us more, which is interesting. It's always interesting dealing with suicidal people, but so we'll see where that goes. I doubt it's just going to stop at like the 25% destruction thing. There's probably going to be another mass strike maneuver sometime soon. I would assume would be like the logical thing to do and, take that up to like 50% weapons stock destroyed. But we will see as it continues to play out. And Iran is holding themselves back from actually getting directly involved because uh, as I've said before, in terms of internal domestic stuff, Iran is really not intelligent and wants its own citizenry to revolt against it. In terms of how it's conducting like warfare and external stuff, Iran is actually really, really intelligent. Really, or what would be the term? Uh, High tactical intelligence. Versus Russia, who is the opposite of that. But Iran is actually really tactically intelligent. They're well aware that, especially after now that we've moved, we specifically referring to the US, although the UK and France have also relocated stuff into the region as well. But even just referring to we as in the US, uh, they're well aware that we're now in a viable position in terms of justifying it to ourselves that the moment they actually like got directly involved in something themselves, like actually launched some of their own missiles at Israel, we would then count that as a viable jump in trigger for ourselves to start mass striking Iran, which Iran obviously doesn't actually want. So they are completely continuing to play this through proxies for the moment, although they have gotten a bit bearish twice now. They have launched some Shahid drones themselves from Iran at a couple ships in the general Arabian Sea area. But now India is starting to not wall off, obviously, because you can't physically do that. But in terms of like defense, air defense coverage, India is starting to kind of wall it off with their own naval vessels. So in terms of actual like conflict with Iran itself, the only real way that's coming is if Iran eventually crosses the point where they decide they're actually going to launch like a massive wave of ballistic and cruise missiles at Israel themselves or at, any US bases in like Iraq or Syria. But for the time being, I am of the doubting side that they would actually do that because they, like I said, they've predominantly actually been tactically really intelligent up to this point, at least. However, people can always just turn 180 on a moment's notice. So that could change. All right. Now that was going to be one of the longest speaking portions, obviously. So now I can drink some water and check chat. Good old maps. Or you mean Google Maps or Google Earth? Yeah, Google Earth is an issue. Like, there's the three main portions of Gaza. There's Gaza, there's Khan Yunis, and there's Rafah down there. Shows Gaza, shows Rafah, but Khan Yunis is like the second biggest one. What does it show instead of Khan Yunis? Everything else in the surrounding area. Want to show me Khan Yunis? No? Want to show me Khan Yunis? Oh, now you show it. Okay. Now that I'm only, this close. All right. I'm going to drink some water. Then we're going to go into some non-conflict regular stuff, and then eventually we'll get into the other ongoing big conflicts, and then we'll get into other non-conflict stuff, and then that will probably be it because I promised those else in the house that I would finish this by 8. I'm probably going to fail that as I always do, but we'll see. Okay, what do we have here? Or rather, what do I want to go to out of the things that we have here? Ah, okay. We can swing over to India since we're right in the area. India has started a production from a new offshore field over in this area, not the one that I was talking about over in this area, which is where most of their new stuff is at the moment, is in the Bay of Mumbai over here offshore of, for the most part, in this portion offshore of Gujarat, with some of it now offshore of Maharashtra. And a lot of their past previous stuff has been onshore Gujarat and some onshore Rajasthan, with most of the rest of the stuff being over in West Bengal and up here in this inland stretch. But this whole portion here, the North Indian plain that arcs around like this, likely does have a decent bit of oil and gas in it. But with the exception of Rajasthan, they haven't done a lot of oil and gas exploration there because it's a bit difficult since, especially this right here, is where a huge chunk of India's massive population lives. And obviously, it lives very densely. So it's, not exactly all that easy to do oil and gas exploration there because, you might at some point have to like forcibly remove people to a different location. So they've been sticking with offshore and with Rajasthan, although they kind of avoid Rajasthan off and on because that ends up causing issues with Pakistan, which is annoying. So the predominant new stuff they've been going with is offshore in this general area, although they do have stuff offshore of here on this little shelf, one of which just started up a 45,000 barrel per day field. And this year it got delayed, apparently. Sometime this year, a 77,000 barrel per day field offshore of here will be starting up. So those two together this year should bump India back up over 700,000 barrels per day of production briefly before their decline takes back over and they start heading back down under 700,000 through the 600,000s again. Meanwhile, this year they're likely to, start making their way up into the upper 5 millions in million barrels per day in terms of demand. And since it was the the arbitrary year of choice for that the future stream last week, by 2032, they're probably going to be up, over 6.5, somewhere like close to 7 million barrels per day in oil demand by 2032. So their import dependency ratio is only going to be getting worse. But other things regarding India include their GDP update. And again, unfortunately, this site, which is where a lot of these things get published and condensed, is not going to publish these things until like April or May. They do publish these gray bars, which are never correct though. You guys saw these last year when I showed you some of these stuff at the beginning of the year, and then we saw obviously where the bars actually ended up being, whether lower or higher. But they do always put these gray bars that's I don't know what algorithm they're using for them, but they just basically plug in an algorithm and it generates a gray bar. But India was a bit above 3.4 trillion for their end of 2022 economic size, and for the end of 2023, they actually exceeded expectations. They were expected to come out at just under or right at 3.7. They actually ended up over 3.7 at 3.73 trillion for their total economic size as they continue rising in terms of average income, which then fuels domestic spending, which boosts the economy, which then also fuels government revenue, and the government is able to contract more construction of like infrastructure and things, which is more economic fuel, which then permits more business, which is more economic fuel, and also so much stuff is relocating to India from primarily China, because everyone who's intelligent at least is trying to get their stuff out of China before the event happens. This year, of which fall of this year, autumn of this year, is the first year in which like it's 50% or over a chance. Like this year might actually be it. But we'll talk about that later. But India is now up to 3.73 trillion in a total economic size. And in other terms, their population, despite what you see on population clock websites or on, uh, you know, big news articles that want, grabby headlines, their population is not already 1.45 billion. It was a bit over 1.37 billion at the end of 2022. And as of the end of 2023, they've come out at under 1.39 billion, with the number most likely being 1.386 up to about 1.388. We will have the exact number narrowed down, obviously, sometime around the middle of the year once they're done crunching the numbers out. But the massive already at like 1.45 billion stuff you see is usually from population clock websites, which again, kind of like the gray bar stuff. In this case, they're pulling that gray bar from one of those population clock sites, I guarantee you. But in most cases, those population clocks literally just run on a linear algorithm that they update once every 5, maybe 10 years. And that part I found out because I've actually been looking at those clocks for like over a decade and was dumb enough to actually, believe them in the past. But I, eventually noticed the fact that they never changed like their rates, except for maybe twice a decade, if not then only once a decade. So India's population is somewhere between 1.386 and 1.388 billion. And as I've said in the past, they're projected by the UN still as peaking somewhere around like 1.7, I think. However, I have them pegged as likely peaking at around 1.55 or less. And their fertility rates update came with them now being down to a bit over 1.7 children per woman, whereas previously they had fallen down to, I think, as of 2020, because these graphs here, if you just look stuff up, these graphs stop at 2020. For some reason, they won't update these. Uh, hey, that's another thing I'll do, I guess. That's another thing I'll do. I'll make a another Google Doc for you guys where I'll have the fertility rate graphs, except, unlike all these sites, I'll actually update them for you, every time there's new data and not just, every 4 or 5 years, keep it locked at the same thing. How about that? I'll do that. Um, but anyways, they were down to just over 2 in 2020, and they've kept going actually, and they're now down to about 1.7. It could be different ones had it pegged in different places between 1.7 and 1.8. So we'll just say roughly a little bit above 1.7 is their total fertility rate at the moment. So they are still just going down. As I said, they're nowhere near those lower levels yet. But as I said, it's looking like East Asia is not going to be like the anomaly anymore. It's looking more like that's actually going to be what's normal. Now, from that, actually, we'll go ahead and do the at least initial beginning of the year fertility rate updates across the globe from those who have updated them. So there are a few countries that are actually like going back up a little bit. The U.S. for the longest time held, a bit under 2, but then over the first like 15 years of the 2000s of the 21st century started going down and got down to like 1.6. However, over the last like 7 or 8 years or so, we've actually climbed up, but only by a little bit. We've climbed back up from 1.6 to 1.7. So it's not like an actual like massive back upwards climb. It's just a tiny bit. Similarly, Greece has recovered somewhat, and a bit unexpectedly for some people because their economic situation has not really improved. It they're stable. They're no longer in free fall like they were in the early 2010s, but it hasn't like gotten better or returned to pre early 2010s Greece. But their fertility rate stopped dropping at about 1.2 and actually has recovered back up to 1.4. Now, granted, obviously 1.4 is still pretty low, but it's it's still that's higher than the 1.2 that they dropped all the way down to. Ugh, all right, who else do we have? Turkey looked initially like they were leveling off close to 2, I think. What did it look like back in 2020? Oh yeah, for a while it looked like they were leveling off there close to 2, but once you hit the mid 2010s, they started going down, and these all stop at 2020 because no one wants to update these apparently. But Turkey, as of their most recent numbers, is actually down to 1.6 now. So that's not going well on their end. Iran is actually lower than Turkey. Iran was, I mean, no one really forced them to, but they kind of forced themselves because the Ayatollah like gave away the situation anyways when he's given like recent impassioned speeches, like begging young couples to have more children across the country. Since he kind of already gave it away, they just sort of underhandedly admitted to the statistics. Turns out their fertility rate, while they were still insisting it was at about 2 and stable, they've actually dove down especially over the last, several years. I wonder if, anything's been happening internally that would be discouraging, to the people of Iran and make them not want to have children that would be forced to grow up in such a situation. I wonder if the government of Iran's been doing anything, you know. I wonder if there have been like, uh, mass. I wonder if there was like a bunch of unrest, and they started like killing anybody who was participating in it, and then doing that again, and then deciding to in response to the unrest that they were going to double the forcefulness with which they were going to enforce those rules. And also, they've been having a lot of breakdowns in their infrastructure because they've been relying a lot on, getting stuff from Russia. However, now Russia is kind of having issues getting stuff in and of itself. It still is able to get some stuff. However, not enough for both of them. So when Russia is being forced to choose between Russia and Iran, Russia kind of, is choosing Russia. Not that that's really helping them, but we'll get to that in a minute. But Iran is starting to have massive infrastructure breakdowns, giving them power outages, uh, you know, not because of the grid itself. Their grid is actually maintained okay, but the power plants are starting to catch fire, are starting to explode, and they're starting to have pipeline failures in their natural gas system, which is now actually, over the last several weeks, has even started causing problems for Iraq as Iraq just like announced, that they're starting to have electricity issues because they're starting to find failures in the actual amounts of gas delivered from Iran. So things are breaking down in Iran, and Iran is now about to jump into civil unrest again, despite having France to learn the lesson from. Iran has just announced that they're going to cut back on pension benefits. They're going to raise the retirement age up a number of years, and so that has pissed people off. And to the surprise of no one, it looks like they might be about to see a new set of riots, which is going to be even more chaotic and discouraging for the people of Iran. So turns out, instead of staying around like two, like Tehran claimed it was, their birth rate has actually been diving and is now down to around 1.4. Who else do we have here? Oh, yeah, Argentina. Argentina had been around like 2.3 for a while, but over the later 2010s, they kind of started dropping quicker, and now they're down to around 1.5. And with the economic implosion that wacky hair guy's election just caused, and all the chaos that's starting to ensue from that, I can only imagine that's probably going to start going even further. Do we have anyone else here in Latin America? Who else do we have? I thought I had Mexico here somewhere. It looks like I do not. Okay, so over to uh, who did I have from Africa? I thought I had a few from Africa. Oh yeah, so even the countries that uh, more racist leaning people were concerned about, outpopulating everyone else, even their birth rates are actually starting to drop pretty fast. And I will talk about that in the essay thing that I'm writing up about the decline in fertility rates over the last 2 centuries or so. I'm writing up this whole essay about all the different factors, how they've interacted with each other, and all the additional factors that there are. that some of which you guys might have never heard of because people only really focus on specific things based on their political agendas. But one thing you will notice actually, once the population starts gaining like en masse, once they start gaining internet access, that itself starts to produce like that adds a factor of its own into a quicker drop, which has primarily, since a lot of the nations in Africa are still like far lagged behind in industrial developments and healthcare and a lot of things. However, because of the whole smartphone revolution thing, internet access has been faster than a lot of things in reaching a lot of people. And over the like later 2010s, especially, is when a lot of countries, particularly in Africa, started getting mass internet access to like huge degrees. And that since then has seen their fertility rates, which were declining just at a gradual pace like this, has seen them start to take a more curve downwards. Egypt, which was up around like four, and everyone thought was going to wobble around up there for a while, has gone down actually pretty quickly over the last like 5 to 7 years and is actually down to 2.6 now. Nigeria, I did not write down, but I recall they were up at, I think, 4.5 and over, and they were only declining at like 0.05 per year. However, over just the last like 4 or 5 years, they've suddenly now dropped a lot faster from 4.5 down to like just under 4 or 3.9 or something. Whereas you'll see in the countries like within Africa where internet access is still not really prevalent, the fertility rates are still declining at like those very gradual paces, like in the big Congo and in Niger and Chad and stuff. All right, was there anyone else here that I had? Iraq has kind of gone through the same thing. They were up at about 3.8, and it didn't look like they were going down all that fast. However, recently, over the last number of years, they have started dropping much quicker and are now down at 2.9. Malaysia is one of the few countries that, at least over the most recent years, has gone back up in fertility rate by a little bit. They were right around the same area as the US, 1.6, and they've actually gone back up by the same amount from 1.6 back up to 1.7. Thailand, as it turns out, is much lower than we thought it was. We kind of thought they were around 1.3 or 1.4, I think. However, now that they've updated their data more thoroughly, turns out they're actually more around 1.1. China, I mentioned in the previous stream, came down this year, or technically last year, right in the middle of where I expected, because they were down to 1.05, if you guys remember, and I said they're definitely going under one and will probably come out with the end of 2023 data somewhere between 0.96 and 0.99. And their data came out and they are at 0.98. So they are now in the exclusive under one club, which they are currently the fourth member of. It's a very exclusive club. They are only in there with Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. The lowest member is still South Korea, though I doubt that's going to remain the case for long because China is really chasing them for that record. They're now in fourth place. For anyone who is who is after like the specific rankings. Uh, Number one is South Korea, currently holding out at 0.78. They've stopped diving. Taiwan is right behind them at 0.86. Then is Singapore down there at 0.96. Now is China in fourth place at 0.98. Then comes Thailand at 1.06. Then comes Russia, the first nation outside of East Asia to be in there at 1.15 as of the end of 2022. Or sorry, as of the end of 2023 numbers, probably going down to like 1.1 or 1.09 by the end of this year. Obviously, we'll end up seeing later. And then, uh, so that's Russia is fifth. In sixth place are tied Spain and Lithuania, or España and Lietuva, both tied at 1.16. And then for seventh place is a tie between Italia and Nihon, or Japan, both tied at 1.21. And then after that, there are a whole bunch of countries that are now around like 1.2 something or 1.3 something. But I stopped after those four because that theoretically, or sorry, Russia was sixth place, Thailand was fifth place. So because those four would have effectively made a top 10 if it weren't for the fact that Spain and Lithuania were tied and Japan and Italy were tied. The Philippines actually turned out was lower than expected. They seemed to only be around like 2.5. However, they are actually now less than two. They're at 1.9. Vietnam is one of the few that is actually legitimately staying stable. They are still declining very gradually, but compared to like diving fertility rates, they're remaining relatively stable. Like over the past 15 or so years, they have gradually declined from about 2 down to about 1.9. But comparatively, that's effectively staying stable though. Compared to everything else. Did we have anybody else on here that I wanted to cover? It does not look like it. Oh, wait. Sorry, in Latin America, when I said there was no one else, looks like I accidentally lied. We do have Brazil here on this list, and they have continued going down from the 1.8 that we knew them to be at, and are now down to 1.5 as of this year. That's the ones that I have written down, and I thought I had written down Mexico somewhere, but it looks like I was incorrect. If I remember correctly, off the top of my head, they are not going down as fast as Brazil, but they did go down, I think, from like 1.9 down to either 1.8 or 1.7. But, anyways, that is that. Now we'll go over to more specific stuff again, and we'll actually head back over here to China. So, China's economy, we'll see again the gray bar stuff. China did not grow in the way they would have preferred last year. They grew only up to about a flat 18 trillion. They did better in 2023. Looks like they got up to 18.6. However, that represents only a 3.5% growth versus the, 5 or greater percent that's, Xi Jinping promised. He's, restrained himself from the prior promises of like 7 and 8 continuing indefinitely. Now he's been promising 5% each year. However, that is no longer manifesting. And that's it's starting effectively. So they're up to 18.6 versus the over 19 they would have preferred. And their whole real estate sector is undergoing its collapse, as was inevitable, because it's effectively a Ponzi scheme. Because China doesn't take immigrants, so people aren't moving to China, and China's population was already showing signs that it was going to peak even years ago, and it was going to probably drop harshly. So, all these new houses, all these new apartments, all these entire new cities that are just endlessly being built on relentless contracts are were never being built for anyone. 'Cause no one's going to be there. So this whole thing was running on basically a hype train of everybody, big realtors, earlier in the 21st century, were all convinced because of how fast China was rising that China is the next big thing. So they all wanted to get in on it. So they all bought a bunch of real estate and kept doing it, expecting that China is going to be the next big thing. So the real estate prices would go way up, and they did up until these last couple of years. So they bought all that stuff. Then they would sell that to the guys that came in behind them, who would then sell that to the guys who came in behind them. And eventually fought on, it caught on within the real estate like industry that it was turning into a Ponzi scheme because this was a dead end. However, they were kind of locked in, so they had to keep going, and each group of guys had to like at least try to sell off had to like try to dupe a lower level of guys and convince them that it was still going to get bigger price wise, and try to sell the stuff off to them at least marginally more than they initially bought it for. However, that train has stopped. People have realized it's over, and so 2022, the Chinese real estate industry plunged by 12%, and 2023, it plunged down by another 10 or 11%. So close to a quarter hemorrhaged out of that in just 2 years. So that is um that is a decent parts of the GDP holdback, because that whole real estate Ponzi scheme thing was a sizable portion of China's economic growth engine, surprisingly. But elsewise, their fertility rate, like I said, is now under 1 at 0.98. And for their actual population update, they dropped within the expected range that I had said earlier, ignoring the stupid gray bar thing. So they peaked at 1.413 billion, dropped down in 2022 to 1.412 billion, and turns out they dropped by 3.1 or 3.2 million people over the course of 2023. So that would rounded put them now down from 1.412 down to 1.409 billion, which is right in the middle, actually, I think, of where I expected, because I expected between 1.408 and 1.410. So that's literally dead center, actually. So they are on their way downwards. And with all this upcoming, they kind of, that would only add, fire under the feet for the whole last gambit, dying gasp for a recognition thing, or hoping for some great accomplishment that might relight fervor in the general populace of Chinese society. It's not going to work. Even if it actually succeeded and they actually like captured the island, it still wouldn't have the effect they wanted to. But uh, it's not going to work anyways, because the whole invasion thing isn't going to actually end the way they want it to. All right. Who else and what else do we have before we go into The other major ongoing conflict. Oh, yeah, Ecuador. Ecuador had a fun time the last week or so. So, their various gangs and cartels got really angry because the government had captured one of like the big leaders and he was in prison. And so then, over the last number of week or not weeks, over the last number of days, but the last roughly week or so, the cartels and gangs in Ecuador started acting up to like the fullest possible extent. They started committing random bombings, just detonating car bombs in random places. They started, capturing hostages, executing people with like gunshots to the head on camera, uh, committing shootings, just like massacring random people. So Ecuador has now defaulted into a state of pseudo chaos, although it's not like full chaos because it's not like Afghanistan and Somalia at the height of their chaos. Day to day, like regular society, like everything is happening and is functioning just now with the added threats of you might randomly get mowed down in a cartel massacre. So that is ongoing, but the Ecuadorian military has mobilized and has been engaging in firefights with different cartels and gang groups. Some have been captured, some have been killed, obviously, and so we are waiting to see the outcome of that situation. And in terms of their oil production, not because of the cartel stuff, but because of, I forgot whether it was a lawsuit or a protest blockage, they did have to shut down some fields that will take about 70 or more thousand barrels per day offline, which will drop their production to about 400,000 barrels per day versus their domestic consumption levels, which in present day are now up to 300,000 barrels per day. So, that will thin their already shrinking export ratio for however long those particular set of fields have to remain shut down for. Oh, yeah, almost forgot. And up here in Panama, they decided because of mass protests everywhere, which were kind of crippling the economy, they decided to shut down the copper mine, which is located up around here or so. And that was responsible for not too much, but about 1% of global copper supply, about 200,000 tons per year. So that shut down. That's put a mild dent in copper supply and was responsible for about 4% of Panama's GDP. So, initial outlook was based on the numbers from last year that Panama grew from 77 up to 79 billion, maybe 80 billion. And because of taking that mine offline, it looks like Panama will, over the course of this year, depending on how things go, will then fall back down 77 billion, maybe only 78, because they are probably going to only inch. If the mine were still operational, they probably would still only inch up a little bit to like 81 or so, maybe 82, because of how stalled the canal has been because of the lack of rain. Although there have suddenly been batches of rain that have been coming, so that may finally be over, but we'll see. All right, that is it for there. And the one other, or okay, well, that wasn't bright news, actually. Sorry that I would have implied that. But along with Polska, uh, signing on to actually go with the blue glow with nuclear, and France finally announcing that they are going to grant life extensions to some of their older nuclear plants. And for the ones that are too old and will be shut down, they are going to commission new reactors and are going to keep sticking with nuclear. The and Sweden and Sumi, Finland, have already announced the same, with Sumi about to start up a new reactor that they just installed, I think this year or maybe next year, that will take them up to like over 50% nuclear power, I think. And Sweden's contemplating commissioning one or two new reactors that would potentially take them up to like over a third nuclear. The UK, excuse me, I asked you to zoom in on the UK. Thank you. The UK is considering, and they haven't officially stamped it yet, but they're considering. I really hope you guys like choose to make a smart decision for once. First you deindustrialized yourself, then you decided to shrink your military because you'll just the U.S. will handle everything, and then you decided to be British, which that wasn't the best choice. Ooh, burn! But now you might have made a good choice because supposedly, whether you actually go through with this or not, you have at least announced that you are going to commission 10 plus new gigawatts of nuclear capacity, which would take you up to somewhere between 15 and 20, depending on when and if you retire certain other reactors. So we'll assume 15. We'll do the lower one, which out of your usual electricity demand, that would be like around 40 plus percent of your power, if you actually got up to that much nuclear, which, that would be 40% constant, a flat line across the board of constant power output. And then the remaining 60% would fluctuate as a mix between your offshore wind stuff and your various coal and gas plants. So, one more smart one added to the map, potentially. Okay, potentially. You haven't actually committed to it yet, so I'm still waiting to see. Okay, now over here, before we get into the conflict, we do have some of the cascade of failure beginning in Russia already. Over the last week or two, at the worst possible time, when they've been at -20 temperatures Celsius, which is a bit under zero in Fahrenheit, they've started to have mass heating system failures across different cities, including Moscow. One of the untouchables, one of the ones where people, both non-Russian and Russian, usually told me, if unless the bad stuff happens to people around Moscow or people around St. Petersburg, Russia itself won't really care. Well, apparently, actually, in Moscow, not the city, but it's like immediate surroundings, had one of these. In close to 200,000 people lost their heating, and there have been cascades of such across other regions, up and down. Some of them were, out in Siberia and out in the Urals, which would be wave offable, basically. But now a majority of it is actually starting to happen in, like Russia, the part that Russia, exclusively cares about, along with also mass power failures in Krasnodar and in Rostov, not just Rostov Oblast, but Rostov, the port city. So all of that is happening at the moment. You stop flapping around. Blah blah blah. Uh, okay, hold on. There's one other set of acronyms I wrote down here that I do not remember what they meant. which is a common theme with me writing acronyms that I don't remember. I have three bullet points here. Those were two of them. The third one, I do not remember what these acronyms were supposed to mean. Come on, come on. I'm trying. Nope. Uh, I can't remember what they mean. All right, so whatever those were. Oh no, that's what they were. That's what they were. The sudden, massive, everything is burning theme is continuing as well. The most recent one of which, or at least the biggest one, was this one, which was a massive, massive warehouse in excess of 50,000 square meters of product storage of all kinds of retail products that just, went up and, it wasn't really anything anyone could do exactly. But there's also been other ones. I don't like that new side thing they're doing. There was a few other ones. What was the other one? Oh yeah, Sparebank's new building, along with a few heating stations and power plants across the place. Oh yeah, this is the at least the translated map of the various places around Russia that have been suffering either heating system breakdowns or power collapses, with a interesting amount now actually starting to happen around Moscow, which is again one of the supposed only two care about points. And the secret fourth bullet point that was not on the list because I wrote it off in a corner somewhere. Rosstat, the Russian statistics agency, has published a extremely delusional thing. So, hold on, we go down here. Here they are. Now, they just have a gray bar there for now, but they're down closer to 144 even by their numbers. Their numbers are not accounting for deceased combatants and not accounting for the million plus people that fled Russia. Uh, a few hundred thousand of those have returned. So it was initially closer to 2 million. However, the total like net loss of that is now closer down under 1.5, closer to 1 million. So in reality, that plus the roughly 200,000 combat deaths is like down closer to 142, like just a bit under 142 and a half. But even off of using their numbers, which the end result will be closer to 144, this prediction is really delusional. So, and the highest like hemorrhaging for them has not actually started yet because they still need to get the other portion of their large population wings to cross over the death age threshold. Okay, did I actually properly label them under R? Did I? Whoops. Yeah, so the even further out, like bigger portions of their population wings have not like fully gone into the death age yet. So their number of just natural deaths, just natural decrease per year, is only going to be going up. Then it will take a break for a few years before going up even more massively. So Rosstat said that from what will be their number once they publish it of like around 144 or above, Rosstat claims that over the course of now up to 2046, over the next 22 years, Russia's population is only going to drop from 144 down to 138 million. That is like the biggest hypercopium I've ever seen. 138 is under the better scenario, like where Russia is going to be in 2032. in reality, it's gonna be a bit lower than that. 2046, you're looking at like sub 120. I don't know where this 138 copium is coming from. But anyways, on to the conflict. No significant like control or line pushes in either direction. Primarily, again, just artillery exchanges for the moment. Anything like would have been primarily stalled for like the last month or two and a half, I think, is one of the two mud seasons in the area. Though I think right around now, because it's the middle of January, I think this is when stuff is usually frozen enough to when like the 2 month window of winter movements would start. And then if I remember correctly, it's around like mid-March that it gets muddy again until like the end of April and or up until the middle of May. And then there's like a bigger 5 month window during the warmer months of like late spring and summer and early fall when like movements and stuff from either side would happen in either direction. I might be wrong about that particular slot of timing, but since the last one, Ukraine launched several drone and missile attacks across Crimea, hitting a few select sites. Most of them were the remaining fuel depots. Although Russia is primarily avoiding keeping aircraft in Crimea, but just in case they, were going to decide to do so again, even if it would only be for a short time, Ukraine was taking out remaining lingering fuel depot stations. And then, ugh, what was this? What was this acronym? What was this acronym? Why do I always do this? I need to just write stuff out. What was this acronym? All right, I don't remember what that acronym was, but uh, likelihood that the first initial few F-16s are actually already in Ukrainian service. As I said way back when, the initial announcement was that will Ukraine will get F-16s by 2025, and that was said in very early last year, which then I translated meant okay, we've already started training pilots on F-16s, at the end of 2022, and Ukraine will probably have them by sometime early in 2024, if not the very end of 2023. And it looks like it ended up being the very, very earliest part of like my expectancy window because Russia's aircraft losses were going at a regular pace of roughly one going down a week. And they didn't suddenly change the amount they were using on any particular position, uh, you know, nor did the range of Ukraine's AD systems suddenly just jump by like a massive factor. However, yet all of the sudden, once we hit New Year's, 5 or 6 Russian aircraft got shot down like within a span of 72 hours. And now, such just happened again somewhere over the Sea of Azov, which is well and beyond Ukraine's AD system range. And one was a cargo transport aircraft, and one was an AWACS aircraft, of which Russia never had parity with the U.S. Russia had about like 10 or 9, whereas we have like a lot here. AWACS, yeah, stuff like this. The aircraft that have like the big radar dish and stuff that give these huge, these like really extended over horizon like coverages and tracking coordination kind of stuff. The Russian one looks like what is yeah, theirs is the A50, I think. Yeah. Theirs this is what theirs looks like. One was just downed over the Sea of Azov, along with a transport aircraft that was presumably flying stuff to either Crimea or I think the only place they've been taking stuff into in Zaporizhia is Berdyansk, which is right here, I think. But the thing with the F-16s is that they're both from being at altitude and because the radars, even in the mid-range, not oldest but not newest versions that we would be handing them off, are better than what we gave them with their ground systems. They would have decent further, uh, a decent further like over horizon capability to track stuff, and also, the whole fire and forget thing where they could like intrude, lock on at a substantial distance, then fire and ditch. So I'm putting it as high likelihood there's like not, a fleet of them, but there's probably like two or four that have already actually made it into service. And eventually, uh, I forgot what the rollout plan is to actually hand over. It's like somewhere between 12 and 20 or something like that. And then there's potentially the whole Swedish Gripen thing, but that's going to be a bit more delayed. But a similar, you know, not the announced schedule played out with HIMARS was actually the first thing you saw it with, because initially in the early days of the war, after we promised them HIMARS, we said that Ukraine will get HIMARS around like early 2023, maybe the end of 2022, and they ended up getting them way sooner than that in June of 2022. And then the same thing has repeatedly happened with each piece of promised equipment. All right. And was that thing about the ballistic missiles. So, Russia is apparently running thin on ballistic missiles, not cruise missiles yet, but they are running thin on ballistic missiles as they are now having to use North Korean ones, which they already have been relying on North Korea for artillery shells now, which, uh, even off of complaints published by Russian artillerymen, the North Korean shells, which are Soviet shells that the Soviet Union gave to them generations ago, are not in the best condition and don't always even fire, which is, kind of problematic slightly. But the North Korean ballistic missiles seem to do okay. But the whole issue is the fact that Russia has to rely on those now. And no, that this is not comparable. Those who comment about how asking how this is any different from Ukraine relying on outside help. Ukraine was slash is a weak non-power. You are supposedly were supposedly a superpower and supposedly a self-sufficient independent superpower. However, that visage of you has entirely shattered. And for your multiple launch rocket systems, you're now also relying on rockets coming back from Iran that you gave them generations ago. So this is not exactly going according to plan. There were new cruise missile attacks on, as always, random apartment buildings. Russia has now expended about 4,020 cruise missiles out of a net total of likely somewhere just under 5,300, as they started with around 4,000. And assuming that their factories have been working at maximum efficiency 24/7, then they would be increasing, they would be gaining those at a rate that would, as of this month, put them at an additional 1,300 since the start of the war. So that would be obviously a net total of 5,300, out of which they have now expended about 4,020, and out of which they still would not actually be able to use the entire 5,300 because remember, Russia also does have the whole global power image to maintain. They have other fleets in the Black Sea, the North Fleet, their Pacific Fleet that they, probably want those destroyers and those frigates to have cruise missiles in their launchers to be able to use if they need to. And also, they probably would still want to have a few of the air launched ones around at different air bases. So, uh, Ukrainian intelligence thinks that they would stop when they have only about 800 left. I think they, because of how locked in Putin is, I do think he would gamble it further, though. I think they would probably uh, not actually stop the at least cruise missile activities until they were down to only about 400 left, which would effectively be how many would be left just in the launchers of their other fleets, and maybe a few at like certain other air bases and down in Syria and stuff. So, once it would get to the point of having to actually like pull them out of launchers of ships elsewhere would be like the stopping point, which would be at the point when there would only be about 400 left, which uh, as of now would be if they had expended 4,900. But the net total goes up by about 60 or so each month. It was formerly higher. However, one of the cruise missile factories did actually get critically damaged. I think it was in Bryansk, or it might have been in Kursk, but I think it was in Bryansk. So that was one out of six that got damaged. That took the monthly like production output down to more around 60. But also the cruise missile accuracy has started slipping lately, and they've started having falls in Rostov and in Krasnodar because they air launched the stuff over the Caspian Sea, and they've started having like with each wave one or two that just fail and fall down in this general area, never actually like going to strike a target. So that is more than likely due to substitution of not as like optimal parts because like I said, they're cut off from like, you know, better stuff from over here and from Japan and South Korea, but they do still obviously get stuff from China, but that's not exactly proving to be like of the best quality. Now, all right, what else is on this? Blah blah blah. Oh yeah, they have just started. Actually, this probably does mean that the ground is frozen enough now. Now that I actually remembered this, they did just start another wave of attempting to take the Avdiivka area by suicide charge of both men and vehicles. Although in the various soul crushing videos of watching like 25 dudes die at once via an artillery strike on a overloaded vehicle or a drone strike on an overloaded vehicle, uh, the guys aren't really running like they were, back in the fall and or in the warmer months. Now they're predominantly sitting on the vehicles because they wouldn't really keep up if they were having to like trudge through the snow. So now you're getting to see vids of like 25 dudes packed on top of one BMP, rolling across the snow trying to do the Avdiivka charge again, which is ending the exact same way as all the other Avdiivka charges did. And with 25 dudes plus the dudes in the BMP, which would be like, I don't know, the 5 or 6 dudes it carries plus the crew of two or three I think it depends on whether you're manning the turret or not. So like 25 to 30 dudes like just going out at once in these like suicide charges. The aim of which is, let's get here, streams down here. The aim of which is, because this is the current control situation, minus a bit here on the shores of the Dnipro River, because Ukraine has done several landings that they have connected together in this like snake of moderate control over here that they seem to actually be pushing from and actually like committing to. So I I was apparently wrong about that. Like I really didn't think they were going to take that and actually push from that as a direction, but it looks like they actually are going with that, and for good reason, as it turns out, because Russia apparently really didn't expect them to take that one either. And also, Russia's attempts to dislodge them from there have been really non effective. Whereas Russia halted the actual, like, initial counteroffensive advance here once it breached the 2 mile thick minefield and the defensive lines. Russia's held this back with the traditional curtain of artillery fire. So now Russia seems to be like dead set on this whole suicide charging thing over here, of which I'm presuming, as I've said before, the intent is this, since they control Luhansk, and one of the many different meandering and often contradictory reasons Putin gave for doing the invasion was to liberate Luhansk and Donetsk. So the probable aim here, I was and still am assuming, although it's not looking all that promising for them anymore, was to try for this, preferably from Putin's end before his election in uh, in March or April, to at least try to do this, seize like the rest of Donetsk, so that they can go with that particular reason, and then use that as a way to declare that the war is actually over now and it was totally victorious. And honestly, probably even would actually pull back from Kherson and Zaporizhia if they managed to do that, instead of try the whole withering hold thing. But they would, as they did with the north and with Kharkiv and with Kherson, they would be publicly announced as a gesture of goodwill or whatever nonsense they phrased it as. But that's probably the aim behind all this. Although pulling it off before Putin's election is, more than out of the question at this point. But he would probably still want it to happen just in general, so that he could have a like domestically acceptable excuse to end the war without looking like what it would otherwise look like. So the suicide charging has resumed around Avdiivka, and some stuff around Marinka, but that only happened like once or twice recently. But the whole like focus seems to primarily be on Avdiivka again. So that is like quite literally, since there is actually a hill there, that is seems to literally be the hill that they want to die on, is Avdiivka. So we'll observe the play out of that as it happens. And outside of that conflict, was there anything else on the list here that I missed that I would want to include in stream? Okay, it looks like there are a few things. Let's zoom out. Tap, 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 tap. Oil production has started from Senegal's first field. So Senegal has already had a lot of exploration, particularly in this offshore portion and in this onshore portion. and I think 12 things have been found, four of which are in development. The first one of the offshore ones has started and is up to most likely around 35,000, and it's going to hit its ceiling at 100,000, which it will, then hold as is expected for 2 or 3 years before starting a decline. And the development timelines of the others, I do not know. I've tried getting that information, but they do not have actual timelines, at least yet. But that's probably because stuff in Senegal kept getting delayed. Like this field, the one that just started, the first one was supposed to start in 2022. Then it was supposed to start in like earlier 2023, but it ended up starting in later last year instead. Actually, I should check chat, like a responsible streamer. Uh oh, wait, I did. I did say I would end at 8, and I failed, like I always expected. Uh I mean, on my chosen clock, it is 4:27. That is the clock I would be on if I were still back up home in Alaska, because I, for those unfamiliar, am from Fairbanks. I really would prefer to still be in Fairbanks, but when 2020 happened, I was one of the people it happened to, and you know, a lot of people got their jobs in previous lives back. I was not one of those people, so you know, I have now for 4 years been down here. I've had to live at my parents' place now ever since 2020 happened. So I would like to eventually, hopefully, get, un 2020'd and be able to go back up home, but it's not looking like that's going to be happening in the immediate future. I did say in my 2032 future stream last week, maybe by 2032, hopefully that will be like a solid prediction thing that will be realized, but we'll see. Uh, let's turn this up. Blah blah blah. Somali pirates. A sub. What is a Substack? The only time I've heard the word like Substack sounds like that was in like I don't know rap songs or something that Josh plays. Blah blah blah. Zoodoo. In Alaska, I worked in a security desk position for the university in Fairbanks with, uh, ironically enough, with a couple that had immigrated from Somalia. They were some of my coworkers. They didn't work for the same building that I did. They worked in a different building on the upper portion of the university's campus up the hill. But they were some of my coworkers, and it made sense, especially after they had to deal with some of their first things and did completely fine compared to like some other coworkers because they had experienced like what Somalia used to be. So the kind of things that we occasionally dealt with, up there were not things that really scared them because they weren't the two of them, both the husband and the wife, really weren't going to be intimidated unless someone like had an AK-47. What else? Oh, the other side, over here. What is over here that I wanted to include? Oh, yeah, some other economic numbers. So, Mexico, we initially expected was going to go from 1.47 up to 1.55 trillion for a total GDP uh, as of the end of last year, start of this year. However, it's looking like they jumped past the expectations and might have actually exceeded 1.6 already. So they might get up to the closer to two that I was expecting them to reach by 2032, even faster than I thought they would, which is a typical trend with everything that I, put out a projection or expectancy for. Uh, it usually ends up happening like instantaneously, with the exception of oil and gas production numbers. Those do tend to like go along my assumed projection lines, but everything else, especially like geopolitical decisions and wars and invasions, seem to keep happening like within 2 weeks of me saying something. And the me saying something usually included me saying this should probably occur around like 5 to 7 years from now, and then it happens next week. So everybody is apparently just like trying to speed run everything. Vietnam last year made it up over 400 billion for a total GDP economic size. They got close to 410, and we thought they were going to get up to close to 440 over the course of last year, but they went past expectations and are actually closer to 470 billion for their total GDP now. Malaysia went right along with expectations. They were right up over 400, and we thought they would get up to around 430, and turns out they've made it up to 431 billion, which is bigger in their case than in Vietnam's case, simply because Malaysia only has one third of the amount of people as Vietnam. So, that total economic size, goes 3 times as far. But they do also have the whole cut in half separated by sea issue that also does add a bit of extra like infrastructural cost that other countries don't often have, with one of the exceptions being their immediate neighbor Indonesia, who has that even more so to a greater degree. Who else did we have here for their numbers? Brazil looks like last year they were, or rather 2022, they came out at 1.92, and looks like now they have continued going up and have exceeded 2 trillion once again. They used to be up above 2 trillion before. Now they're back up above 2 trillion again. Uncertain about the final amount yet. They are still tallying some stuff. So we'll get that like certainty in a few months. But it does look like they have made it up above 1 trillion. Russia is looking like they took a drop. They jumped up to 2.2 trillion from the, you know, uh, fascinating oil and gas prices that came as a result of the invasion. And hold on, skip that. 5 years. There you go. So add the oil prices, but then also in big parts, while they were still pumping out that much gas before everyone was able to migrate away, you had the gas price giga surge, which has now subsided. And actually, the prices now for particularly European gas are actually even lower than they were in 2021 before the invasion started in 2022. So in absence of those extremely elevated prices, Russia dropped down to initial statements from their Ministry of Economics is 1.86. Uncertain if that's final or accurate, but we'll find out, or we'll hopefully find out. France jumped back up over 3. They had dropped down from about a flat 3 down to a flat 2.8. Now it looks like they've jumped back up to 3.05. A lot of that hindrance in 2022 with a lot of European economies was because of like the increased price of oil and gas, which and the accompanying increased price of electricity, which caused a lot of industries to cut back stuff. In 2023, that wasn't really the case anymore because the prices dropped, and also not that they were like a giant portion of that, but even just in 2023, last year, before the massive switchover from Boeing to Airbus after Boeing's most recent cataclysm, Airbus was already getting like a huge bunch of new orders, anyways. South Africa is continuing. They dropped less this year. Uh, they're although technically, you also even factoring in for just general dollar amount inflation, because this is GDP measured. GDPs are presented as measured in dollars, so the individual inflation in each country isn't entirely like directly factored in. The predominant face value comes from the just general inflation of the dollar. Factoring in the dollar inflation, their economy, if it stayed flat from what it was last year, which last year it had dropped from like 425 or something down to 400 and I think four. It would have, if it stayed flat, it would have gone up a little bit, at least in appearance, up to like 409 or 410 or something. However, it went down a little bit to 399, which is effectively more like dropping by about 10 billion. And the reason for this is, to the surprise of no one, the massive, horrendous blackouts that continued, especially during the first half of last year, was when they were at their worst. Portions of the country would be without electricity for 12 hours at a time, and those subsided in the later half of the year. But in the last couple weeks, the first few weeks of this year, they've started up again. For the moment, it is only 4 hours at a time for each individual like area within their grid. Uh, the grid areas of any country do not usually follow like state lines. They're usually their own weird thing. Like this wobbly area here is a grid area. This area here is a grid area. Then there's one that wobbles around and then comes back like that, something like that. These aren't the actual ones. I'm just saying that there'll be weird things like this. And then, the Johannesburg and Pretoria area will be its own thing. But each area for the moment only has to go for 4 hours each day as of right now without electricity. So, that's not really the most encouraging thing. And they didn't have high mineral prices to buoy their economy for the moment because a lot of those aren't really behaving as they should, despite supply deficits that are ongoing. They will get that buoy upshot eventually because when those things hit a wall of deficit reality, the price is going to have to just upsurge instantaneously in a flat line similar to Namibia's borders. But also, they're now even suffering the whole rail network breakdown thing because the same criminal gangs that raid like transformers to like rip the copper out of them to sell it on the metal market or the metal black market, they're now raiding like train traffic stations and like redirecting switches and stuff to rip the computer components out of those so that they can hustle the precious metals. So South Africa is down under 400 at 399. And was there anyone else on here? Oh, since I know I do have a couple of viewers from Romania. Romania continued climbing upwards a little bit from 301 up to, it looks like, 308 billion, which is around the same rough economic size as Portugal, but Portugal only has half as many people, so that's why Portugal is, kind of higher economically up. But the like one benefit to the whole Romania's collapsing population thing is that, eventually that rising amount of money is going to be spread across less and less people. So eventually, Romania will not look like, stereotypical Eastern Europe. Uh, who else? Spain, for the same reasons as, France for the most part. Looks like they jumped back up from after dropping down to 1.42. They dropped back up to initial outlook is 1.58 trillion. And not the highest they've ever been. The highest they've ever been was 1.63, but relatively close. And the US uh, jumped from initially the first outlook was 26, but it looks like it might have been closer to 27. I'll wait on the finals to come out for that. It'll probably end up being more like 26 and a half. And then the one other that I have here is Canada, who stayed basically the same. Actually, you guys dropped a teeny bit from 2.14 down to 2.12 trillion in total value. All right, and that's the end of the stuff I have on the massive list. Randoms. I mean they never seem to have an issue with it. I mean, I never heard them complain about it. Shut that down. All right, this is probably going to be it. Unless anyone has anything else they were going to ask or say, or any super chats come in or anything. So I'll wait like, I don't know, a minute for the normal delay to go by. Drink some water that I was supposed to be drinking this entire time. All right, I'm assuming that's it then. And YouTube's complaining about my bitrate anyways, even though my bitrate is perfectly fine. All right, so there's nothing else from anybody, so that's going to be it for this one then. So I'll see you guys in the next video, which was supposed to be the monthly oil production levels update video, but uh, the site still hasn't updated. Oh, wait, no. Now it has updated them. Okay, so now I can actually make that video. All right, well, then the oil productions level update video will be the next place that I see you then. So I'll see you in that. And that's it then for this one.